Okay, welcome to another episode of the Women Petpreneurs podcast. And this is going to be an educator series. Right. So I literally just hit the record button, but River and I have been here for the last 45 minutes talking. Okay. So I want to welcome River Lee. Hi, River.
Hey, Mary, how are you today?
Pretty good. As you see, I'm in my outside office.
I'm very jealous. I think that's amazing. And yes, we have been talking, and that's the best thing about the pet grooming industry is that we really do have a community over competition, and we can all come together and talk about our strengths and our weaknesses and figure out how we can work together or help you guys out.
So a lot of what River does, I do, but there's a lot of differences. So River and I have chosen to be colleagues and work together and sort of like, you know what, there's many people I will send over to River for her classes because they're simply better than what I have. And not just River, there's a lot of classes out there that I know are excellent. And I'm thinking, you know what, your class is better than my class. And you know what? That's okay because I'm going to, when people ask me for this particular type of class, I of course will mention that I have that class, but I'm also going to say, hey, I've also taken this class and I think it's just spiffy. You want to take.
And that's so flattering. Thank you so much. I think that's what's wonderful, right? Is that, again, there's definitely times when I send people over to Mary for certain classes that she has, or I'm like, hey, if I'm not the right teacher for you, I teach in a very specific way. I have a very, my brand is definitely, very matter of fact. And Mary is, if you want checklists and you want a banging, her workbooks are absolutely outstanding, and that's what's wonderful, right? Is that Mary, your classes, you teach different, we can teach the same exact thing, and your class may be better for that student than mine. And that's what's wonderful about this community.
And what I hear sometimes is that, well, I can't teach this because this other person is teaching it. And I'm like, no, you can absolutely teach this. Okay. I can remember Barkley had basically a Bichon day at one of the trade shows. And it was four or five different instructors, each teaching Bichons.
Yes.
Okay. You will learn different things from different people. Okay. And so it's wonderful to get different perspectives. Right. But we'll start off with because I am highlighting actually River here. Okay. So
I think it's okay. Listen, as long as you are not stealing proprietary information from another educator, go out there, teach your stuff. But yes, let's get to me. But absolutely, we're here for everybody else. Don't worry, right?
Okay. So first of all, how did you first get involved in the pet industry? Let's start there.
Oh God, many, many moons ago. No, just kidding. So I was always that little kid that loved animals. I wanted a horse, and my mom said, if you want a horse, you can go buy one. So at 11 years old, I started a pet sitting company. I was like, all right, cool. I can buy a horse and save up for one. But professionally, I really started, like most people, at a corporate grooming salon, and I was going to be a vet. I wanted to be I was a dog trainer at the time. And I was like, okay, what can I do to work in the pet industry? The college I went to actually had a elective for you to take dog training and to take grooming. And at the time I was, I moved from corporate to a regular doggy daycare, and I was the manager of that doggy daycare. And very, very long story short, my groomer made more money and never showed up for work. And I was like, how is she doing this? So I said, I'll go get this grooming certificate. That way, when she doesn't show up for work, I will be able to just groom the dogs, right? And it's a very long story, but the very short version is I was like, wow, this is a lot of work. I had worked as a bather at PetSmart, but I'd never realized how much skill and expertise. I was the person crying at grooming school because I'm like, why can't I just pick this up? Because the artistic people were the kind of people that just picked up their scissors, and the dogs look beautiful. And I have to learn kinesthetically doing things over and over and over again. So it took a lot of willpower to learn grooming. But long story short, I got pregnant with my son. We were homeless, living in our car. The doggy daycare decided that they couldn't afford for me to have a maternity leave, so they let me go. And again, I'm skipping over many details, but I opened up my first grooming salon 4 days before my son was born, and we lived in that grooming salon illegally. Do not do that, please. Do not do the things that I have done wrong if you can. But that's where we started. We started in our own grooming salon, doing everything wrong. And my goal was to make, a good amount of money. I started hiring people, and the education at the time, and this is a long time ago now, but the education at the time in the industry really wasn't effective. Unfortunately, a lot of the things that people would tell you really weren't designed for people that were like me, that were single moms and didn't have any stability, right? I didn't have anyone I could rely on. I was just doing the best I could. And I was like, all right, what am I doing wrong? I'm doing all the things that they're telling me to do. What am I doing wrong? Where are the pieces of the puzzle missing? And so I started listening to business books and outside of our industry and saying, oh, I see, this doesn't work because this, so let me pull from this. And that's really where my education came in. I listen to still 10 books a month on business and education, because I do think we need different perspectives. And I think it allows you to reinforce and obviously never take proprietary information from other educators, but you can look at something and say, okay, what is this telling me about what I'm doing and how can I do it even better? And that's really where I began, right? Is I had this grooming salon and I was poor and pregnant and scared. And I was like, man, I've got to figure this out because there's no alternative here, right? It's do or die. And I was really lucky to have the resources to do so. And so really the savvy groomer for me is, and I don't want to get emotional. I just got like little goosebumps, but I want to be the person that when little River was in that grooming salon, 22, pregnant, terrified, I'm going to be like, hey, we have so much content for you to learn for free. And then when you get some money and you get things working, we have these master classes. We have all these other things for you to do. So that's really where I began and where I feel like we kind of are, right?
Right. So you then decided making that transition into, was it coaching first or teaching first?
So this is one of those, like, it was accidental. So what ended up happening is I had built up that grooming salon. I sold it. I really had a desire where my son was going to kindergarten and having the large grooming salon. We made a lot of money, a lot of money. I had 5 employees. We had a membership model, but I really, my dream at that point was to go and drop him off at school in the morning and pick him up. I wanted to be that parent. So I went mobile and feeling exclusive. And basically what happened is when I went mobile, I assumed grooming cats on a 4-week schedule for $100 to $200. I assumed to fill my books, which is about 100 monthly clients. I assumed that would probably take 2 or 3 years, right? That's what we would assume. But it only took 6 months. And so basically what happened is I started posting in groups like, okay, I did this thing. I have exactly what I wanted to do. What do I do now? And I expect people to be like, oh, you can hire, you could do this. And people are like, wait, you did what? Tell me how you did this. And so we started teaching about that. I would say our very first passion in the Savvy Groomer was personal finance. I'm a big Dave Ramsey fan. We believe in building your business with as little debt, if not, without any debt at all. So I started teaching a class on personal finance, but I feel like Savvy Groomer really took off when people wanted to know not just how to get a handle on their personal finances, but also how to build a business that's aligned to them, from a financial perspective, of course.
Okay, that was really good. I remember when that class came out. It was a really, really good class because I think sometimes people don't realize that. I think a lot of people wing their business.
It's, yeah. I always say life is a lot better being proactive than reactive. I spent the majority of my life trying to outrun decisions that I had made. Again, I'm not here to say anything bad. I was a single mom. I was homeless. Like, I definitely made some poor choices, but at the same time, I wanted to be like, okay, how can I be proactive versus like, okay, I have no money to eat. What do I do? Like that, there's so much more energy in that. So having a budget and having every dollar have a name. Personal finance Alicia is definitely my favorite class next to price increase masterclass. The goal for next year is that we're actually, and again, Mary, once I say something, Mary's going to hold me to it. We're going to personal finance Alicia facelift. We're going to be teaching that in our group mentoring next year. And we're finally, now that the whole economy is finally getting more stable and we know what's happening with, credit scores and things like that, we're going to be launching business finances unleashed next year as well. So we'll have all that for you guys.
I think River and I had a conversation about was it like a year ago?
A year ago.
About a year ago on virtual assistants, because we both realized, we use them in the manner that makes sense for our personal businesses. Okay. But they're a godsend. Right. It helps me do tasks that I don't want to do. All right. And we all know when we don't want to do something. It's like that trying to drag that 3-year-old to the store and they're just going limp and you don't want to do it and you're stamping your feet. And when you do that, it just really takes you so much longer to do it.
1000%. I always say, find something that's in your zone of genius. And then if it's not, find somebody else to do it for you. It's going to make you so much happier.
Oh yeah. When I start and I pay my virtual assistant, I pay $25 an hour for.
Yeah. And I think there's different, and it depends on what you need them for. I think there's definitely cheaper options in the Philippines, but I think the average groomer, and this is why we started this program, Mary and I were talking about it. And it's like, we were saying that, we cultivated our virtual assistants, we nurtured them and we grew them to where they were, because what we do is very specific. I use a very specific software. I like things done the way I like them done. No one's shocked. But as far as groomers go, the majority of mobile groomers at this point are basically virtual assistants when they're running their business, right? Everything is done basically virtually, right? They're scheduling everything online. They're doing all these phone calls. And what I was noticing is that because groomers were having such a hard time hiring staff, just regular grooming staff, they're grooming more. And that time that they're doing the back end or the phone calls or, even just inquiries, right? They don't have time to do it all. They're working an average of 60 to 80 hours a week, and it's just not sustainable.
It's not. I estimate that my VA probably gives me back a full day every week. And it's probably taken her, I don't know, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But I'm dragging my butt. I'm literally spending all day. Well, I take it back, maybe a full day and over the course of a month. Okay.
Well, we did a poll and we realized that the average grooming business owner, and now this is people with either no employees or lots of employees, they spend an average of 8 hours a week on the phone or communicating with clients. That's an entire day.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, oh, I do phone calls on my day off. I'm like, oh, so you don't have a day off, right? And there's a lot of, and I think on the flip side too, I think we're kind of we had a chicken or the egg situation. We're like, okay, do we teach groomers about why a VA is important or do we grow VAs? So there was a lot that we had to do in the year that we were creating this class. And we're not even fully done, right? It's going to have 3 tiers. The first tier, which we've just launched, is a foundational course. It's understanding what is a VA, what are the basic things. And if you're the kind of groomer who's like, well, I know how to book. It's like, cool. You know how to book for you. Yeah. You are inside your own head. You know all the little magic nuances that are in your head. We're also teaching people how to get inside other people's heads, right? My employee, we call it the coffee. So I'll tell, so Tiffany knows, right? If I were to ask her to have if I were to ask her to have a drink in the morning, right? If I said, hey, can I have a drink? She would bring me a Starbucks coffee. And in fact, she would know me well enough to hand me the exact coffee that I like, right? Because she has a very assumptive brain. Most groomers have very assumptive brains. And I said, so explain to me how you knew I would want this coffee, right? She's like, well, I don't know. I just know you like them. I'm like, okay, so if you had a new person, would you just assume they want coffee in the morning? Or would you say to them, hey, do you want a hot or cold drink? Oh, I'd like a hot drink. Great. Were you thinking like coffee or tea? Maybe I actually want a cold drink. Okay, so you actually want a cold drink. Do you want a smoothie? Do you want an iced coffee? Right. And we have to be able to communicate that as a VA to grooming business owners. And I think that we wildly underestimate how many things that we assume versus we've actually asked. We talked about this in one of my classes about employees, because if I said to you, okay, go wash this dog, Mary and I might wash dogs totally different in totally different orders. We might choose shampoos differently, right? And that's the truth. Like my shop, we always wash dogs 3 times. You might be like, why did you wash the dog 3 times? I'd be like, well, one for the hair, one for the skin, and one for all the places I might have missed, right? And you might be like, well, we don't wash a dog more than once. And that's fine. But without me explaining to an employee that we do it 3 times, right? And do you start at the head or do you start in the back end? Do you leave the conditioner on for 2 minutes or 5? These are all the things that we as groomers just assume we know. And whether it's an employee or a virtual assistant, we have to create a way to actually put pen to paper. And I think what's awesome about Mary is Mary naturally has that wonderful brain where she does break these things down all the time.
Yes. So my latest checklist right now is putting together a retreat, because what? For me, checklists make my world go round. Right.
Yeah.
So now when I put on a second one, I just pull out the checklist. Well, I got to do all these things. Life is good.
1,000. And I don't naturally have a very linear brain. My brain is very much like, ooh, piece of candy, right? The way I generally, if I have a checklist, I rebel against things. Like I don't even do a recipe if it's more than 3 ingredients, because I'm just like, it's too much. I don't want to do that. So when I clean, I go, okay, what do I notice? Well, how can I group things together? But you can't do that as a VA, right? And so if you're going to do things like that, we need to actually create pen to paper. And the same thing too, when we're hiring employees, we can't just be like, okay, employee, I'm going to tell you this one thing one time and hope they remember it. Right. So we have to, as both educators, business owners, whether it's a virtual assistant or as a grooming business owner, even if it's not our natural way to do it, we have to create those things. Right.
Yeah. And to be really clear, I actually have nothing to do with Savvy's, with River's step away from the table program. I just simply told her, and I know there could be some people right now shaking their heads. Okay. I simply told her, hey, that's a good idea. You ought to do it.
I appreciate the mutual like push, because sometimes I'm like, I don't know if this is, because again, like step away from the table is definitely a passion project, but it's been a long time standing, because for me to create a project that, like checklist is not my my forte. So, Mary was wonderful at encouraging me. And I definitely, hired a company to help me make sure that what we're just calling our guidebook, right? Like our module 1, and it's a 6-module masterclass. Module 1 has a 50-page guidebook. So it literally walks you through how to create scripts for that module, how to create templates. And that's just the foundational. So I think that's where, it's going to be so helpful for somebody who doesn't know anything about a VA, how to become a VA. Or if you just want to do an audit on your own business and you're like, hey, I don't actually know, like, do you book big dogs in the afternoon or do you only book them in the morning? Or you're just kind of like throwing, any dog at any point in your scheduling, right? There's so much involved there. And I'm really, really proud of this class. It did take a year, and thankfully Mary has been like, hey, where's this class? Hey, I'm like, I know it's coming.
I'm like, I got people interested in your class. I need a launch date.
I know. And it was really hard too, because I wanted to make sure, because we originally wanted to have it as 1 class, but we did end up doing it as 3. The first one is the foundations. You need to understand how to do these things. And then 2 is cool. Now you know how to do these things. It's going to be our business manager, our office manager. So then in tier 2, when it comes out, I won't give you a launch date yet, Mary, because you will hold me to it. It's coming out before the end of the year, I promise. And that's going to be okay if you want to literally take over the back end totally of someone's business, and you can actually help manage their staff. build these systems into their business. If you have someone who's like, I don't know what to do, you will have the education on tier 2 to actually be taking on that student who has no idea what to do with their back end, and you can coach them and guide them through all of those. So,
and I love the fact that you hired somebody to help you put together the program. All right. And it just really reiterates, you know what? You can't be good at everything.
No, you can't. And I think that's where I knew my brain, I had these really wonderful ideas. I knew how I would teach someone for my business. But I wanted to hire someone who could understand any business, salon, mobile, in different ways. So I hired a Swiss curriculum coach is what they're called. And she actually owns her own virtual assistant, not academy, agency. And so I hired her to help me not only create this, but make sure that it would fit in anything. So it took a long time for us to do back end research within the industry, look at trends, look at where we think the industry is going to go. That way, when we created something, we thought that it was going to be something that'll actually last. And that's a lot of work, not gonna lie.
Okay. So what I want to know is, do you remember the very first class you taught?
So I did the first webinar I ever did was called How Can I Afford It? And I remember shaking in my boots teaching it. And I basically taught, it was a webinar, and it was teaching basically pet groomers how to break down the cost of an item. So if you wanted to buy a hair vac or a bathing system, whatever, it was like, okay, how can I break that cost up and then slowly save over time? Because I'm really passionate about being debt free. Again, it's that reactionary versus being proactive. It's really fun to have money in the bank and go, you know what? I'm just going to buy this $10,000 thing. It was really satisfying to save up for my car and buy it in cash. And I know I'm a nerd, so some of you guys are like, that's not fun. I'm like, it is. It feels like you're winning, right? Debt and savings is the same stick. Debt's just the pointy end. So when I taught How Can I Afford This, it was all about, hey, you don't have to go into debt to buy this thing. Let's break down how long it would take to save up over 3, 6, or 12 months. And I really loved that class because I had so many people that felt defeated and like they had no control and they really wanted something and they weren't able to afford it. And all of a sudden they're like, wait, I could just save $100. Wait, that sounds like a lot. It's like, okay, but if you're getting $10 in tips a day and you're working 5 days a week, that's $50 a week. So you don't have to give up all your tips. You could just save 2 weeks of your tips. And then the other 2 weeks, you could spend that as you wanted to. And it was so much fun to empower people to feel like they were in control. That was definitely my first class. I know I went off my tangent. I got all passionate about it. Don't mind me.
I think another reason sometimes that stops people from teaching is they're afraid. Okay. Yeah. And you know what? And I will tell you, the first class you teach, you will be shaking in your boots. I remember the first class I teach. I can't remember the second, third, or fourth, or fifth, but I remember the first class I taught.
Yeah. Okay. It's true. You're so nervous. And then the other, like I was afraid one of two, it was so weird. I had two fears that could not live in the same universe, right? One fear was that everyone would know all this stuff anyway. And they'd be like, yeah, duh, of course. Right. Or that I was going to give them too much information and they were going to be so overwhelmed they wouldn't learn anything. And I'm like, well, these can't live in the same universe, right? These two fears. But, in my brain, I'm like, either they're going to be like, this was a waste of my time. And I already knew all this, or they were going to be like, oh, you've given me too much information. Now I'm going to shut down and ignore you. And I think a lot of that comes with time, right? A lot of it comes with knowing your students. And in the grooming industry, I'm sure you'll agree, Mary, it's really hard because you never know where someone is starting with how much education they have.
You can't assume what somebody knows. Now, I started in the pet industry later. So I was 38 when I first started in the pet industry, so I'm here at a trade show, I'm 38, 39, 40 years old. And by appearance, it may look like I've been in the industry for a really long time. Okay. However, I'm a new groomer. Okay. The the woman that I would always go to trade shows with, Beth Cristiano, you may know her from we could teach, had first aid classes together at the shows, and she's much younger than me. So we would go to trade shows and it would irritate her no end that people would assume I was the instructor, Beth was my student. It pissed her off,
Mm,
you know?
yeah.
So you can't make assumptions on what somebody knows or where they are in their level of education. All right.
Definitely. I mean, it's, and I'm not here to shame anybody, but I've had students come into even things like the Price and Grace Masterclass, and we talk about what are called KPIs, or key performance indicators and metrics. Don't get scared. We break down what they are, but I'll have someone who's been in business 15, 20, even 30 years, and they don't know gross versus net profit, or they don't know what their KPIs are. And, again, you would assume as an educator that they would be monitoring these things. Or in the employee pay class, we talk about the legalities. We actually ended up going back and adding more legal things when we revamped pay, because we are now on our version 2. I thought, I don't want to just give them things they can Google, but it was so important for us to give a lot of the legalities of employee pay, because I found a lot of students were getting either misinformation or they actually had no idea basic laws about hiring employees legally. And again, if you've been an employer for 10 years, I would assume that you would know these things, but how would you know, right? You would assume the people around you would tell you. So I think that's very eye-opening.
Yeah. And no, I'll agree with that too, because who did we learn from?
Yeah. And I think it's a lot of times, for better or for worse, it's the blind leading the blind. And I paid an attorney, right, to help me create this class, the pay master class, because I was like, hey, give me, federally, what is sound advice that you would give not just your clients, but also someone you love? Because I think sometimes, accountants and attorneys, they either come very, very cautious, or they come very, very creative, right? And I would rather teach it from a place of very, very cautious, because I am always, whenever I teach a class, I think about me being pregnant, living in my grooming salon. And I say, what is the advice I'd give her? Because if you have a higher risk tolerance, then you take those risks. But I want to protect the people that need to be protected, right? That don't have a margin of error.
Yeah. And sometimes we do get bad advice from professionals who should know what they're talking about. I had a friend who I had her, there was no doubt they were employees. Okay. But they were ICs because her accountant told her to make them ICs. And then, but also cautioned that if the Department of Labor comes to visit, make sure she hides them. And that was advice from a professional.
What's crazy is that things like that, right? I always say, if your attorney gives you advice like, they can be independent contractors, say, not a problem. Will you put that in writing? And then I can refer back to that if I am audited. And they won't. You know why they won't? Because they know that it's a gray area. And if it's a gray area, again, it goes back to your risk. I have a very low risk tolerance. For me, I have created a place in my life where I have, money and safety that I've created. But, I don't, and there's nothing wrong if you do, but like, I don't have a spouse to help pay the money. If I don't pay my bills, I'm homeless again. And that is a big trauma for me. So I have to be very, very careful. So I don't want to be audited. I don't want any problems with the government, because, there's no bankruptcy for back taxes and things like that. I've had, students that like come to me and they're like, yeah, I've spent $100,000 in back taxes and fines because I had an independent contractor. I had bad advice. But even now, this switch to salary, I'm like, okay, you understand you can't have a manual labor job, in salary, what's called salary exempt, which means salary that's not paid overtime. So they'll hire a groomer salary, not pay them overtime. And now they don't realize that because they were told either at a trade show or they were told by, a misinformed, right, professional. And now they could owe, thousands of dollars in overtime.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a problem in our industry, right? Where I do think that's where you also need to get information from many different educators, right? Because if I say that, if you ask me, how do I know that? I'm like, well, I talked to this attorney, this is my resource. But, and again, it depends on your personal risk aversion. I have a very high risk aversion. I don't really want to deal with the Department of Labor. That's not my jam. No thanks.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the reason why I personally never had employees, is I just deal with them. I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just my life was so much simpler when all I'm responsible is for myself, and then adding in another layer, because what else would they, as far as I saw, what else would they be but employees?
So I think one of the biggest things that if you want to hear something that makes me very angry, it's that the industry acts like adding employees is no big deal. It's oh, just hire a bather. It's okay, but now you need an SOP manual. You should already have an SOP manual, but you know what you do, right? So when you add the first person you have to add an SOP manual. You have to have an employee handbook. We teach you guys to create roles and tiers, right? Because you need to be able to promote and demote people. You need to have an hourly wage. You need to figure out how are you going to calculate the hourly wage when they become promoted or demoted. How are you going to do all that? That is a lot of work for one person. That's where you really don't see any extra money until you have 3 people, because the amount of time and effort in hiring your first employee, it generally takes a minimum of 30 hours if you're doing it correctly. You need at least 3 to 4 rounds of interviews. You need so much things to make sure you're doing it properly. It really is a totally different business model. It's kind of like saying, I'm going to get a mobile van, only work in it in one day and have my shop. Well, there's no point in having that whole mobile van just to do one day. It's a whole different side of it. So I think there's nothing wrong with being a solopreneur, and you can make lots of money doing a solopreneur job, and it creates a lot less headaches. There's nothing wrong with being a business with employees, but you've got to do it right. And then now if you're like, hey, when my body starts breaking down, I don't want to hire employees, step away from the table, which is a Savvy Groomer, company. We are saying, okay, if you don't want to do that middle part where you're like, I don't want to learn how to grow employees, I don't want to be a leader and a manager, there's nothing wrong with that. Now we're going to give you guys avenues, right, to stay in the industry and make money. You might work part-time, or you might leave completely. You might have some babies and say, you know what, I want to stay in the industry, but I don't want to groom. This is a great way to keep your feet in the industry. And honestly, if you're a business owner and you have a groomer, is going to go on maternity leave, this is a great gift you can give them. You can keep them in your business as a W-2 employee, have them still do work, right? And then when they're ready to come back and be a groomer, you can just slide them back in.
Okay. So I think you make a really good point about making a decision on where you want your business to be. Okay. Yeah. So when I moved out here to Washington, there was this little thought. So I've been out here almost 4 years now. But there was a thought when I was closing down my mobile grooming business in Connecticut. Was I going to sell the van, or was I going to drive it out here and possibly go? I could have gone cat exclusive. But I didn't want to work full time. All right. So that means if I'm moving out of van and I'm going to work 1 day a week.
Yeah.
It doesn't financially, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because all I'm doing is paying the bills of the business and I'm not making any money, and I'm going out and actually working for not even, well, they would be slave wages because I'm not being paid.
Yeah, you would make more money working at a grooming salon than owning the van and doing all of the back end work and all of that.
Yeah. No, I'd make more money standing on a street corner with a container that says I need help, okay,
Yeah,
then
sure.
then try to do that. And so then the decision well, I'm gonna be an educator full time. Okay. And for those who think you can't do it, all right, because River, are you working full time as an educator?
Absolutely. And I think that's I think that's the thing, is that if you have something special to share, if you have a unique perspective, this is absolutely for you. If you have the heart of a teacher, you should do it.
Yeah. And I'm not saying quit your job tomorrow and become a teacher and you'll be able to work full time. And it's like any industry, there's a learning curve to it. All right. And trial and error and seeing what works for you. But I'm really glad that I did. I'm working full time as an educator. River's working full time as an educator. And I had to battle a little bit of some very well-intentioned advice. All right. So nothing in it that someone was trying to be mean or discouraging or anything like that. That was not the case. It was very, very well intentioned, and said I couldn't make a living teaching in the pet industry, especially since I was never a competitor.
I think that's really interesting because I do think that is almost a stigma that if you are not like I'm what I call a technician groomer. You know, I want them cute, clean, comfortable. Can I do a breed standard cut? In theory, they're not ever going to be competition level. They're okay. You know, I jokingly say I'm a mediocre groomer, right? I mean, compared to the people that I know that are complete artists and wonderful. You don't need to be an artist to make six figures as a groomer, and you don't need to be an artist or a competitor in order to be an educator. I do think you need to know what you're talking about.
Mhm.
And all right, so if I tell you something I have cooking for 2024, Mary, will you hold me accountable, but not?
See, River and I spent so much time chit-chatting before we even got started. Okay.
Yes,
So we just simply decided, you know what, this is ridiculous. Let's just set up a virtual
it's
coffee meeting and just go over this. So yeah, absolutely. I will hold you accountable. Uh
yeah.
River, what do you got planned for 2024?
So we're going to create a pet grooming business coach certification.
Woo.
And we're going to have different ways. So our first level is that we're going to be launching in 2024 will be an accountability coach. So
Okay.
someone to hold other pet groomers accountable. And we're going to have, again, 3 tiers. But what's amazing is that this is not to create an online platform and to be an educator. But if you're the kind of person that's like, I just want to be a cheerleader for other groomers, this is kind of the niche that I think the industry needs. However, like Mary and I teach very similar things, right? Mary has wonderful programs where she teaches people how to be a speaker and educator and that stuff. So they can say, hey, I don't want to teach that. You know who's got a great program? This lady right over here, you know?
All right. So let me tell you how great an accountability partner is. All right. So I have one, and she's not in the pet industry. We are in 2 totally different industries. Okay. But the key to a really good accountability partner is the fact that you show up and you're accountable. That's the whole thing about being an accountability partner. And we meet every Tuesdays, and we just have a conversation where we're doing, what we're doing. What I love about Sasheen is she actually takes notes. So
Love that.
you go, you talked about this last week. You doing it? And I'm like, yeah, maybe.
And I think that's what's wonderful is that, and I will tell you this: anyone who is a business coach that doesn't have a business coach, run, right? If they don't have an accountability partner or a business coach, and they're a business coach themselves, I would only take it with a grain of salt. But I do think like people like Mary and I, we need to teach these bigger ideas. We have a lot of programs and things we have to teach. We can't do everything. And I do think a lot of you guys would be amazing, you know, business accountability partners or coaches where you have succeeded, right, in one thing you've done in your business. But instead of, you know, you might be like, as Mary, a solopreneur, right? You know, you could be like, you know, I ran a really amazing mobile business and I'm ready to retire, but I'm not quite ready. You know, I don't want to build a fleet of vans. I don't want to have 30 employees, you know, but what are my options? This will give you an option as you're winding down your mobile to then be a mobile business accountability coach. And I think that would be a great way of doing it. But you also don't necessarily want to build, like Mary and I have platforms. We do a lot of work on the back end. I should say we outsource a lot of work on the back end now, right? But it's a lot of work in the beginning. But, you know, Mary has great programs where you can do like her workshop is amazing. It teaches you how to create that. That's a totally different way than what I'm going to be teaching, but they're going to be like peanut butter and jelly, right? Where she has things that are going to work really well for the industry. And then I have things that are going to work really well for the industry. And that's what I love. And people will tell you, like I have a business coach that, you know, is not in the same industry as me, but she understands enough. I will tell you, it's a lot better when you have someone who has been in the thick of it, because it's hard for the average business coach to understand what it's like to have like a 40 dog day and 2 employees quit, and then a dog sprays anal glands in your hair, and you're just like walking over the tub and you're just spraying your head. People are like, what's wrong? You're like, don't talk to me. Don't talk to me. Don't even look at me. Right. Or you get bit and then you get peed in the wound. And then the person goes, how was Fluffy today? You're like, well, he bit me and then he peed in my wound. How was your day? Right. You know,
and that's a really, really good point. Right. So I've had many coaches over the years, but one of the coaches that I had was a tech coach.
Oh, yeah.
Because a lot of what I'm doing, and honestly, truly, I actually enjoy doing technology for myself. I am not putting myself out there to help anyone do tech. I am just right now, that's not a thing. But I wanted to be able to understand how to work. So I got myself a coach who knew membership programs, who knew how to put them together, who knew all the back end, how to connect, make all the moving pieces move as one piece, which worked for me. So there's lots of different types of coaches out there. There's finance coaches, there's business coaches. And when River and I were first looking for coaches in our industry, there wasn't any pet industry coaches.
You know? No, I mean, a decade ago, there really weren't people doing that stuff. I remember when I had my grooming salon and I did hire a business coach, because again, I was like, my business is, you know, I was growing my business. We were making great money. And I was like, there's things that I just can't fit in. One of their advice was, you'll laugh, Mary, so hard. So I had this business coach and he was a SCORE mentor. And I was like, okay, how do I like, you know, increase profit this time? He's like, well, you already have the water. You already have the soap. Why not just add car washing to your business? And I was like, I'm sorry, what? He's like, yeah. He's like, you already got the hoses. You already pay, you get, you know, unlimited water. Why not just have people pull in the back of your grooming salon? Like, because we had a little alleyway, and just have your groomers wash cars. And I'm like, I don't understand. So you want my talented trade employees to go in the back? He's like, no. He's like, don't just hire like high school kids to do it. And I was like, you really have no idea what I do you? Right. And it's, you know, it's like when hairdressers say, oh, I can be a groomer, right? It's like, well, kind of, but not really. Right.
I will say some of my worst kept dogs were those of hairdressers.
I used to love when they would like decide they were going to trim the bangs and like their forehead was all the way back here. And like, I can't fix that. Like that is stuck like that for like the next 2 months. Right. But it is right. And that's where too, if you guys do hire a business coach, you don't have to hire either of us, but if you do hire a business coach, make sure they have an idea of what you do, and they respect what you do. And that's one thing I also noticed, and it wasn't intentional, right? It wasn't intentional, but I find that a lot of white collar people and a lot of business coaches come from very white collar, very educated backgrounds. They don't understand what we do, and they kind of like look down, like we're the help, right? It's kind of like if we were maids or if we were landscapers, and there's nothing wrong with either of those professions, right? But they act like, oh, you're just like the help, like you can just plug in anyone. It's like, well, this is a trade, so you know, I can't just take somebody off the street, hand them a bucket and a mop and have them clean a house, right? I can do that, but I can't have someone just come in and be a bather. It takes me 90 days to figure out if a bather is even going to stick around, right?
Yep.
And I'm a little sensitive to people talking down to my industry. I've started a few, I had an influencer that had blamed his groomer for shaving his doodle. And I was like, we
Oh,
are
I
not.
remember that. I remember
I
that.
was like, no, 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 no. Like, this is not, no, thank you. Like, no,
You
no,
know,
no, no.
there was a fair number of groomers who jumped down his throat, and to the point that he actually set up an apology.
And again, I don't want to be that person that's touchy like that, but I was like, but it was the comments that was coming from that. And I think, again, it was a lack of respect, a lot of accountability, and a lot of people in those kinds of places, they don't understand what we do. And that's why I feel like Mary and I, and again, I should speak for me only. I think that's where, like, these are my people. I've been told many times I would make so much more money, and I love you all, but it's true. We would make so much more money if we took our knowledge and went to another industry, probably like 3 to 4 times. But guess what? It's not always about making the most money. It's about making the most impact, being happy. This is our community. Like, these are my people, right? And so even if I'm going to make less money, I'd rather make money helping the people that I think deserve it.
Yeah. So, and I do have, well, the actual retirement date is not set just yet, but it will be. But here's the thing. I know you'll appreciate this, River. Once my house is paid off and I have no outstanding debt, okay, I'm going to set a retirement date. Okay. But I really, for me, it is all about the impact. I want to make sure that when I'm leaving an industry, I'm leaving it in great hands. I'm leaving it better than I got it. And with people who want to not only want to share their knowledge, who are appreciated and compensated for it. Because here's another thing, okay? To put together any given program, all right? The VA program that River just put together took her a year.
Yeah. And that's with hiring and outsourcing quite a bit and spending hours, and it cost me a lot of money too to create.
Okay. So it's not like we sit down here with a cup of coffee and our computer and we put together a program in 2-3 hours. It doesn't work that way. All right. Putting together a program is a lot of work. All right. And the longer the program, it is exponentially more time and work goes into it. So if a 1-hour program takes me, let's just for ease say it takes me 4 hours to do, a 2-hour program is going to take me 8 hours. All right. And an 8-hour program and a 3-hour program is now going to take me 16 hours. It just becomes, because now there's so many more moving parts to it. Right. So educators put a lot of time and effort, and they should be compensated. They don't work for free. All right. So like, you don't want to work for free as a groomer when someone is helping you make better decisions on your business. Okay. The ROI, the return on investment for education, done by studies like by Harvard and Forbes, really come to a conclusion that for every dollar you spend on education, you should expect a $5 return on investment.
Yeah.
That's a 500% return on investment.
I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to invest in your grooming schools and things like that, but I'm always shocked that somebody will pay to watch, like you said, like Bichon Day, right? Watching someone to groom a Bichon over and over and over again, but they're not going to invest, let's say, in a masterclass about how to legally pay their employees, or they're not willing to or pay for something like price increase masterclass, where we teach you how to formulate a pricing structure. Because everyone, it's really interesting because with price increase masterclass, and not to toot my own horn too much, but if you're a non-member, if you're not a member of the Savvy Groomer membership, it's $1,000 for the self-study. And you're like, oh my God, that's so much money. It's like, okay, but if we help you raise your prices and do it in an effective way, and you have significantly less stress, you're going to make that money back in 2 to 3 months tops. And I've had students where it's given them the math, the understanding, and the courage to increase their rates. And I had one student send me a message and say, I had to double my prices because everything went up where she lives. Everything went exponentially up. her rent doubled, all her products doubled. And so she had to double her prices. And then she was like, you know what? She's like, you gave me the courage to do that. And she actually groomed 25% less pets and made more money. And she's like, I groom less, I earn more, my clients are happier, and I made back that investment in less than 30 days. And I think those are examples of, like you said, like you think, oh my God, it's all this money. It's like, okay, but what are you going to gain? And you do need to trust the educator who's creating it. Do they have integrity? And are you willing to do the work that comes with a class?
That's the other thing too. So putting to use something you learned in an hour workshop is a lot easier than putting stuff that you learned in a 6-hour workshop, putting that to use. And then let's go into the programs that are several weeks long. Taking that information and implementing it is harder still, because now there's so much more. So there has to be a commitment that if you want to learn, you have to be willing to invest your time. And I've always said it's a teacher's job to teach, but it's a student's job to learn. Make you learn. You have to do that yourself.
So I am naturally, there's 4 different learning styles for those of you guys that don't know. So I know I'm an auditory and a kinesthetic learner. So reading and writing is really hard for me to digest things. So I have to, if I'm going to learn something, I have to really commit to that, because I have to figure out a way to trick myself into remembering things and learning things. And one of the most important things I ever heard, and I don't know who actually said the quote, but the quote was, knowing isn't being. And I think that was incredibly helpful for me, because sometimes I have the knowledge and I'm not ready to implement them. And I think that if you're going to say, okay, I know I need to increase my prices, but either I'm not emotionally ready to do that, or I know I'm not going to commit to that, that's fine. But I think that we need to be careful not to make excuses. I see a lot of excuses for people when they're saying, I could do this class, or I could change my life, but insert thing. And it's always funny. And I don't want to sound cruel, but someone's like, you don't know my life. I'm like, listen, I don't know your life, but I was pregnant. I lived in my grooming salon. Like, we had $20 to eat. Like, I've been very poor. I have been incredibly poor. I've been incredibly difficult situations. I totally respect where you're coming from. It's a choice to not figure it out. It's a choice. And Savvy Groomer literally has, we're going to slow down on doing our weekly live show, because we have over 200 hours of free content. And I'm like, there's no excuse. If you're not ready to invest in a class, we have tons of free content. But I'll tell you what, the amount of time it's going to take you to learn and implement the free content, it would have, you're going to lose so much money versus just buying the class and getting the shortcut. And I do see a lot of people that would rather spend watching, 40, 50 hours of content, right? And trying to figure it out themselves instead of just getting a class. And I think that time is money. It just makes more sense to just invest in a class.
Okay. So I will definitely be holding you accountable.
I appreciate it. And, we're excited to have this VA program. Like I said, Foundations is out. Incredibly proud of it. It's going to change the industry.
And I just want to say that if I had not gone in the direction I went into, being a virtual assistant did make my short list when I was figuring out what it is I wanted to do, that I was not grooming anymore. So I had set my retirement date for grooming for 55. I ended up at 57. And the decision for me to step away from the table had been because my husband has chronic medical conditions. All right. So we basically got one broken down person in the house. We didn't want 2 broken down people. And now with shoulder pain and back pain and all sorts of stuff. And it just occurred to me that I can't keep this up for any real length of time. And I didn't want to we didn't need 2 broken down people. I mean, who's gonna wheel whose wheelchair?
Just like, the electric wheelchair pushing the other wheelchair, right? Little tandem trolley.
Yeah. Oh, basically that could have been an option. So I had to set an end date and decide what it is I wanted to do. Okay. So so if you're even considering being a virtual assistant independent, it is I think it's going to be one of those things that it's going to be met with such gratitude in this industry. So get on the forefront. I see it as a trend.
I think that it's a great way to stay in the industry. And again, I see so many groomers, and I have a lot of sympathy. I had a very healthy pregnancy go very wrong, and for me, I almost died, and I lost my daughters. But I see a lot of women that, if you become pregnant, they're finding that maybe they can't continue grooming, right? Or they decide they want to take some time off. Instead of completely leaving your industry, you have an option. I think that it's going to significantly take the pressure off of the grooming business owners who honestly don't have the time or the energy. And for some of the older groomers, once we have the business manager tier, that's going to help a lot of older groomers that maybe want to go to these online appointment platforms, but they don't have the know-how, right? And someone can come in and say, hey, pay me to set this all up, and then I'll run it for you. I think it's going to really help the industry. A little pressure to, get this rocking and rolling. But, I think it's going to be a win for everyone. And I think that it's going to be such a change. And Mary, you listen, yeah, I know you're going to fully retire, but hey, who knows, right? You might just have a little bit of things to do, right? I know you like having control of things. You're gonna be like, I'm going to just do this for a little bit,
Well, here's the thing. I've always cautioned people about having a retire. What do you want to do when you retire? To set a date, unless you're planning on having your dead body carted out from underneath the grooming table. At the same thing, I want to enjoy what is my golden years.
Yeah.
I want to pull my camera out. I want to take pictures again. Right. I'm got plans to do like a meditation walk type garden
Yes.
in my property. I mean, so I have all these things I want to do, but I don't have the time to do them right now because I'm working.
I know. Savvy Groomer. Oh, so our stance on retirement is that it's a dollar amount.
Yeah.
So again, we believe in being debt free, blah, blah, blah. So, if you're 34 and you have a paid for house, you have your cars paid for, you have 6 months worth of household expenses in the bank, and you have enough in retirement accounts that you could retire, you can semi-retire, right? You don't have to work. Whenever you don't have to work is technically retirement, right? Because now all you're doing is playing, right? Because if you decide, you know what, this isn't for me, and you have enough money, if you have FU money, yeah, right? You can just quit. Mary is doing what she loves. I know she's saying she's not retired, but let's be honest. If Mary hated what she did tomorrow, she'd be like, you know what? F all you people. I'm going to close up shop. You liked all this? You are mean. Bye-bye. Right?
No, I do. And I'm really happy and, doing what I do right now. But again, there's going to come a point where there's something else that's going to make me happy as well. And I want to explore that part of it. Okay. So
yeah. I was gonna say the industry pretends like that's not an option. I think you can love other things. You don't have to groom forever. You don't have to even be in the industry forever. It's okay to have pursuits outside of dogs and cats. I know that's blasphemy. We're speaking blasphemy right now, right? But
as I'm getting a piece of paper and figuring out, I bet I've got 5 acres here. I bet I could do a meditation walk.
No, there was a speaker who I remember, she retired from speaking and she just wanted to hang out with her horse. And there were so many people that were so upset. I'm like, good for her, right? I'm so happy for her. I think that's wonderful. Like, go be with your family, go horseback riding every day. Like, you don't owe anyone anything. Once you have that financial freedom, and if this is no longer fun, don't worry about it.
Yeah, because initially positive educational training was going to be like a part-time gig.
This was my hobby. This was my hobby. It is no longer my hobby. It was like, I'll write a blog. I'll write a blog and I'll have some videos. I'll do like a video tangent once a week for fun. Yeah, that's what, and that might happen to you guys, right? You might get really passionate about Asian fusion, or you become really passionate. I mean, look at Angie Coates, right? I mean, she's, the things that she's doing for bunny grooming is absolutely amazing, right? And, I mean, she probably was like, oh, I just like bunny grooming. You're like, no, you have to like teach about rabbits, right? And now look at her. I mean, it's amazing.
Exactly. Okay, so River, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I really appreciate it.
I really appreciate being here, and we're here, both of us are here for the industry. Mary, thank you for having me here. It's just important to get the news out for the VA program, because my goal is that people that want to stay in the industry or need a break from the industry have options. And I know that's what you're all about as well.
All right, so everybody join me next week when I interview someone else making a difference in the pet industry. The Educator series is going to be several episodes long. So just be aware. All right. Again, thank you so much, River. I appreciate your time and dedication to the pet industry.
Thank you as always.